So hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins, and I'm delighted to be joined by Valerie Brown. Val is global business, brand and partnership strategist in entertainment, hospitality, lifestyle and non-profit. She's the CEO of the Val Brown Group, and where they work with many leading CEOs and CMOs, entrepreneurs, business owners, to drive company growth through ultimately their brand strategy. Val has helped many brands, and you'll probably know some of these brands: the Hard Rock Cafe, City Winery, Nashville Country Music Hall of Fame, MTV, and many others I'm sure we could mention. Val's creative vision and strategic acumen are highly appreciated, not only by the startup community, but also by very established companies and legacy brands. So Val, you're very welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. Thanks very much, Val. It's great to see you. Let's move on. There's a lot of areas I'd like to discuss today, okay? So let's start. I'll give you a little bit of an introduction there, but could you, for our audience, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into working in this global brand strategy area, and how you got into this industry? Maybe that'd be a good place to start.
Thank you. Yes, I'd love to. And you made me stop and think with this question. You sent me a little question beforehand, and you know, it's funny. Like I pride myself on being a good strategist for my clients, but I was totally not a strategist in terms of like starting my career. And I had grown up kind of working in the arts quite a bit, or studying, you know, the arts quite a bit. And I majored in French at a university. Which my father was not pleased about. And when I got out, I got a job as the assistant to a marketing and events director at a very shishi nightclub in New York. And the Brazilian owner didn't speak English, so French was the lingua franca. And the general manager there, you know, and I actually had some event experience because I'd been a waitress while I was in uni. And that general manager left, and I happened to walk into the Hard Rock very late one night because it was still open with my boyfriend, and that general manager had moved there. And he said, Isaac Tigert, the founder of the Hard Rock, is looking for a new marketing manager. I think they called it PR manager then, and because it was a very publicity-driven brand. And he wanted to open in Paris next. And so again, my French got me my job. So Dad, it all worked out. And the Hard Rock just had two locations when I started, London and New York, and actually LA as well. The two founders had split territory. And I had worked for a record label while I was in college, or in between. I took a little time off. And so I had a lot of the pieces, but that job kind of put them all together, and, you know, underpinned by a great love of rock and roll. And I think also I've been always kind of outward looking, you know, in terms of internationalism. And you know, I love to travel, and I took a school trip to France when I was in high school, and, you know, loved the language. And so I think that was what made me, you know, interested in the development, the growth part of the business.
Well, that's lovely. And it's so often that we hear how that language education led into something, right? And it gave you that opportunity that without the language learning, it wouldn't have been afforded to you. And it's a bit of fate. It's a bit of, you know, it just comes together, doesn't it? But it's amazing how often people do share with us how it kind of helped them find their first start or their path. So thanks for sharing that background. And I'd like to maybe tease out a little bit then, because you've mentioned the Hard Rock Cafe, and that's a globally recognized name. And I also read out when I was introducing you at the top, just MTV, which, you know, was a huge juggernaut of a global success. Could you maybe give us a little bit of understanding when it says, when you work with those organizations, what's the kind of work? What exactly are you working on with brands like the Hard Rock Cafe or MTV or any others that you care to share with us?
Well, I think, with Hard Rock, when I started, it wasn't a global brand. It was certainly had a reputation in the UK, and I don't know how. I mean, I think we knew about it already in New York, at least when the Hard Rock opened in New York. I came in 2 years after, but it didn't have a global reputation. And I think I went in and the brand had grown very organically. Isaac was a kind of hippie rocker, and with Eastern religion leanings, and it had grown organically through his vision. But I think when I went on, I tried to kind of analyze and codify like what it is that had been happening, and looking at the brand more and what that represented. And, then everybody, I mean, people didn't say the word brand that often. It was logo. And of course, the Hard Rock was famous for the ubiquity of his logo, which we actively, pursued. And so that was kind of the first part of it, and just kind of setting in stone and getting a steady supply of how we got our publicity, which is basically event driven and cause related, and philanthropy driven. And MTV was a good partner for us in all of that. I later did another project with them, but MTV had only been around for a couple of years as well, at all. And their offices were down the street from us on 57th Street in Manhattan. And so we kind of became like the company canteen, and certainly for events. Every celebrity event we threw, they came and covered with a news crew, which they don't do anymore. And so it was really helpful for us. And we had, big post-show, post-concert parties, and really, I mean, an absolute who's who of like current for the time. And, they weren't legacy yet, but rock and roll acts from the 60s. And that's kind of how we made our bread and butter. But we really did have a purpose-driven mission, even that early on. And that was sometimes how we got celebrities to work with us, because they often had it as well, and they wanted to burnish their images. But then, we went into growth mode, and we opened first in, US markets. And then after about 5 years, maybe even less of US development, we started international markets. We had the London location, which of course made it easier than managing everything out of New York. But, and then it became looking at, city selection, site selection, and understanding really, like, marketing was different in every country. It was, New York, a lot of marketing in the US is local because it's a huge market. And a lot of the media just in London at the time, and this was before digital media, was national. So you had to have a really big story or create a really big promotion for BBC Radio in order for it to be picked up. It was a much lower bar in the US. But I think from like the beginning of the development in the US and before, we were very interested in creating a global image. So a lot of our decisions were made on, how much coverage can this garner us? And we worked again with MTV a lot because they would do major global broadcasts. I mean, it started with Live Aid, actually, before I was with Hard Rock, and where Hard Rock would build the green room and have our wallpaper or our logo at that time, probably, and get national, international as well coverage. And, there weren't so many media outlets to compete with back then, and it was great for our trademark protection as well, because we had a lot of problems with counterfeiting on Hard Rock, both in terms of actual physical Hard Rocks and also obviously the t-shirts. And then later, actually, after I had left the Hard Rock, I was working with Robert Earl from Planet Hollywood, who wanted to develop a music concept. And he brought me in to work with MTV on developing that concept. And it was originally slated to be in the building that MTV is now in the old Paramount Theater, where Frank Sinatra had queues of screaming girls down the street, and a venue. We ended up opening up in London. So I've worked with MTV on and off, for many years. They've been an important partner in a lot of the businesses. And more recent projects have been and I've been very interested in brand extensions and brand partnerships, and as a way for growth and as a way for brands to reach new audiences, drive revenue, oftentimes enhance the value of their brand as well. And we worked with the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum, which is a super iconic organization in Nashville. And, that market has gotten really hot over the last 15 years and maybe longer than that now. And we just saw an opportunity to grow beyond the country demographic, because the biggest radio markets for country, Los Angeles was the biggest country radio market, ironically, and New York was a huge country radio market. And we also saw that subscriptions for Southern Living magazine were throughout the country. And so we saw an opportunity to reach this audience, and we were going to do it primarily through product and licensing and starting. So we went and did a strategy for that. And most recently, I did another strategy for an on and off client of mine, City Winery, which is a fabulous, purpose-driven, working urban winery, entertainment space, and live music venue. And on, first of all, doing kind of grassroots brand work on going back and looking, they have a great brand, but going back and really creating a brand platform, like looking at their mission for where they stand now. And because a lot of people tweaked their missions, over the last 2 years, I think, which we can talk about. And also doing a kind of a style, a look and feel and extension project for them. So it's varied, really every area of brand we've worked in.
Wow. That's incredible. And there's a few things maybe just to highlight there that really stuck with me and resonated with me. And number one was how very much the cause, the mission, the sort of non-profit, the CSR, as we call it today, aspects played such a part in it back then, obviously. And I think that's a very interesting element to think about, because today, a lot of global organizations and global communications, it's very much a core part of what they do. Whereas I suppose back then, in sort of some of the time that you were talking about in the early days of growing that brand, it's very interesting to see how that was very early, I suppose, in terms of maybe a lot of international brands weren't vocal in that area or hadn't even considered it as part of their global communication strategy. So that's the first thing that resonated with me. And then I suppose the other thing was the partnership approach, where whether it was a formal partnership or just because you're in the next block, it kind of how it leveraged and you worked with that international partner, and it kind of benefited both sides. And of course, throughout all that, I find it fascinating. I didn't know that LA had the largest country music sort of following. I wouldn't have predicted that. I don't think many of our audience would have predicted that either. But it just goes to show that when you're communicating, it's about knowing your audience, isn't it? And making sure that you're communicating the right messages to the right people and that it's understood. And you've mentioned that a few times in terms of language, whether you're opening in New York or whether you're in London or whether you're in Paris, getting that language and that communication right to that target audience and understanding where your target audience is and how you're going to reach them through that brand activation or that corporate communication. So thanks so much for sharing that, Val. There's some great insight into that. And I know many people will know a lot of those brands, and it's incredible to see how that sort of journey begun. So as a brand expert, the next thing I'd like to maybe touch on is, are there any brands, even outside of the sphere that you're working in, where you would sort of highlight and say, look, I think these brands are really getting it right at the moment? And if there are, what are the strategic approaches that you see global brands maybe deploying at the moment? Like, what's really working when you look out as a corporate citizen or a global citizen of the world? What do you look at? What sort of influences you?
Well, I think I always have on both my corporate and my consumer hats. I can step in and out of one, but I like to consider them both. Because the more I put on my consumer hat, the more I understand the needs of the consumer, for the brand that I may be, advocating for. And first of all, I just wanted to say, I'm really lucky that I could, bring to or enhance some of the purpose and actually sustainable actions even in the 1980s for those brands. And so that really leads into now where, I'm mostly interested in brands, not that haven't done projects with people that aren't like, exceedingly purpose and sustainability motivated, but those are the brands that I really look like now and that I like now and that I like to call out. As a consumer, I adore the brand Oatly. I'm mostly plant-based. It's the milkiest milk out there, I have to say. But their advertising was, they started as a challenger brand and they had that challenger voice. They were provocative, they were funny. They got into a little trouble, with the ASA. So, and though they're a major player now, actually, they're in 20 markets, they still have that voice actually. And I think a really talented in-house creative team who keeps, inventing new provocative campaigns. But, I look at, someone like Unilever, and I haven't, I'm not saying I've done a deep dive on every product and manufacturing and all of that, but, they've made a real commitment. I think, about 50% of their brands now have big, that both their positioning and in the actions that they're taking are purpose or sustainability driven. It kind of started with Unilever changing their visual identity, which was a really smart change where that logo now has, flowers and, greenery in it. It's wonderful. I think, IKEA is doing, they've always been somewhat interested in sustainable issues, but, they've made a commitment to hire 200,000 disadvantaged people around the world, whether those are refugees or, lower income people. I think that's a wonderful commitment for an organization. And, everyone's doing it. The high street shops have, clothing shops have, and retail brands have a lot of challenges. Their production is difficult. It's wasteful. Some of that can be reduced, but there's always been a lot of innovation in fashion. They have to innovate every 6 months, don't they, for a new collection? But they've really been applying that, not across the board, but they've been applying that in creative ways to, work with those issues. And, everything from retailers like in Paris, Galeries Lafayette has a Restore, I'm not sure the name of it, but a lot of brands, H&M is doing a lot, Zara, they have to be careful of really walking their talk, and not greenwashing, because consumers will call them out on it, but those are the brands that I'm interested in. And it's not just that it's the right thing to do, it's not just that it looks good and burnishes your image. Consumers, it's an economic driver. It's a decision driver for consumers. Consumers would prefer, if price notwithstanding, to buy brands they're doing good things. It makes people feel good about themselves. So
100%. Yeah, 100%. And you've mentioned there some interesting brands that maybe weren't global initially, was more challenger brands, that over time have become global brands in many international markets. And you've also mentioned some very well-established giants, particularly in retail products, and how that sustainability has become such a critical component, and rightly so. But consumers are voting with their dollars, aren't they? They're voting with their pockets. So people, I think, yes, of course, there are disadvantaged groups. There are people where price and food, unfortunately, is a real challenge. But for the consumers that a lot of these companies are targeting, sustainability, it's such a core fundamental that it's good, but there's a lot more work to do, I think, still.
Absolutely.
It's a great start.
Yeah.
So I wanted to maybe, if I can, just think a little bit as well, because we've mentioned quite a few brands so far, but you said something earlier, Val, that really I wanted to pick you up on and ask you a bit more about. You were talking about bands and legacy bands and legacy music, but I wanted to extend that, if I can, into legacy brands. And I'm interested in really your view on how maybe legacy brands can focus on transforming their business, whether that's through international markets or how you sort of
Mhm.
reposition,
Mhm.
breathe new life, adapt and grow as maybe a legacy brand that's moving into this new sort of way that we live and work today globally. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, in the sector that I operate in, or the sectors, entertainment, hospitality, lifestyle, one project that was, I mean, I've been very lucky. I love music and I've worked around music most of my career. So a lot of my work has been fun, but I'm a huge Beatles fan, and I approached the Cavern Club in Liverpool some years ago now, and which, if you don't know, was famous for the Beatles having played over 200 shows there at the beginning of their career. And Liverpool is a Beatles town. There is huge Beatles tourism. There's football tourism also. Um, uh, but I approached them and I said, you have an amazing brand, can I help you develop it, internationally? And actually I had seen a little note in the Guardian 2 years before that, and sent a note to the Cavern where he said, oh yeah, we think about growing sometimes. And I sent a note, and 2 years later it came back. So agencies, in terms of, business development, you never know when this is going to come back to you. But, and so, I did an international development strategy for them and licensing strategy. And, the thing is, you have to be, when you have a legacy brand, you have to be realistic about it. You have to see, is there any there? Is there brand loyalty? Is there brand equity? How many people still know about this brand? And so how beloved is it? And, we went back in the Cavern, there were some absolute, slam dunks. The association to the Beatles, a beloved and evergreen band and brand, still appeals to, multi-generations. And I don't think that will ever stop, to be honest. And they've done an excellent job at protecting and preserving and growing that brand and business through their amazing creativity. But so we looked at that, and the challenge that we saw was that the Beatles are happy for people to use their name in Liverpool quite kindly, without the rights to do so. But you can't, and rightly so, do that outside of that market. So we had to expand the narrative of that brand. First of all, beyond the Beatles, and also because, it hosted many of the greats of the 60s bands, from the Stones and the Kinks and, Elton and Queen and Oasis and Arctic Monkeys, and they had been using a kind of little tagline, a foot in the past, a hand in the future. And so I really lit upon that needed to be part of our positioning now, because we had to make the brand relevant to today's audience. And they did have a commitment to launching new talent. So, that was the direction I saw that was right for that brand. And I think, it's also important, depending on what size business you're working at. I work a lot in the medium-sized enterprise area, and you have to be willing to make some investment, to relaunch it. Your marketing costs are going to be way above what you would, normally have to. And I think, we get into it maybe in a later question, but I think partnerships are a great way as well to kind of launch quickly and piggyback, in effect, sometimes on other brands. But
Well, let's talk about that then, Val,
yeah.
if we can, because I mean, it's very interesting. Like the Cavern Club, to me, I would resonate with the Beatles. But then as you start to talk about all the other people that have played there, launched their careers there, and that sort of hand in the future approach to it, it does
Mhm.
reposition it automatically, doesn't it, in
Yeah.
people's minds that says, well, actually, we're very much part of this machine that
Mhm.
uncovers talent and shares new talent with the world. So let's get into that a little bit. So in terms of the insights then that you could potentially share with us today about increasing that brand value, increasing that brand reach, either for legacy or for new brands,
Mhm.
is it that partnership that you just referenced, or are
Well,
there lots of different insights that you need to play into here?
yeah. Um, I think a lot of the insights come in the planning stages, in the research stages. You have to see, do you need investment? Do you have what it takes to take this bigger? And then also you have to do, you have to launch your marketing a little bit, before you start reaching out for partners. But I would say that a brand that maybe is not legacy, but is a bit moribund, uh, can look to partnerships as well. And if you look at certain brands like Crocs, now that may be better known in America, but it was a very big brand. I don't know if it was 20 years ago or 25 years ago. They're amazingly comfortable. I wear them at home, and they were a red hot thing. They had retail shops, in throughout New York, and eventually those shops closed, like the fad passed, as it were. And after a while of, they had a core audience and they had a medical audience as well. Same thing with Birkenstocks, actually, right? They have people who work in hospitals, healthcare workers. They started partnering with people, and they have totally rejuvenated their brand, and they've made it cool again. It had dropped out of the cool category. And actually, Birkenstock has done that as well, not to as big an extent, but and that's just been very clever. It's not unlike how Hard Rock kind of piggybacked on celebrities. This is you're getting brand equity, is rubbing off on you. Brand reputation is rubbing off on you by association with these brands. And so, I've been really hot on that lately. It's just interesting too. It's fun. A lot of the associations are totally unexpected, and they're funny, and it's also opened them up to new demographics. If Crocs was a little bit with an older demographic, it's been made younger by some of the partnerships that they've done, with DJs and artists and talent and other brands. And Lego has done great things with partnerships. I think they just did something with Adidas. And it's funny, speaking the Beatles earlier, the Yellow Submarine brand, which has a little bit more malleability than working with the Beatles brand, has done a lot of great partnerships as well. And so, it's a highly creative side of the business. It's fun. It can revive your brand. It can grow even into licensing at some point. I mean, it is a licensing deal per se, but once you've strengthened your brand, and depending on your strategy, you can become, a huge player at mass market in licensing potentially. So,
Yeah, and I think you mentioned Adidas or Adidas, the brand. They're very involved in high-end fashion now. I saw some very interesting collaborations only in the last week at the time of recording this, which was a very unusual partnership for me to
oh yeah,
see. And I
fashion is
went,
the
wow,
best
that,
at this.
yeah, it
Yeah.
really works. And you're right, because it sort of brings in a new audience, doesn't it? It breathes new life into it. And that partnership approach certainly does increase the brand reach.
Mhm.
And both parties typically benefit from it. And you mentioned as well celebrity, and of course the right celebrity, assuming they haven't done anything wrong in the public eye, or they don't take a misstep, which happens from time to time. Um, but celebrity plays a big part in that, doesn't it? And you see more and more celebrities taking a part in design and creative endeavors because of their musical background. Maybe if they're a musical celebrity, it's a very creative
Yeah.
endeavor anyway. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I think also, I think that industry had to pivot because with the advent of digital music and the Spotifys of this world, artists were making a lot less money, and they were making more, most of their money was coming from touring, which is a tough business to do all the time. And so their managers, or the artists themselves, I guess, wanted to find new ways to drive revenue. And this made perfect sense. And absolutely, yes, they're creative souls. So
Absolutely. So look, as we're coming towards the end of our discussion here, but I do want to squeeze a couple of extra points in if I can, Val, and just ask you a couple of other things. So we're obviously, hopefully, coming through the tail end of a global pandemic as well. And I just want to ask you about the importance of branding during the last, say, 2 years. And have you seen big changes in strategy in the sort of clientele that you work with? Has there been any good examples of really good brand execution during a very challenging time? Like tours and international music venues pretty much shut in
oh
lots of
yeah.
locations. So it was, I imagine, quite a huge challenge to reposition, refigure out where do you go from here. But just in general, over the last couple of years, have you seen any major shifts or anything that you think has been a particularly good brand execution?
I don't know if I have specific brands in mind
Right.
for that.
Right.
It was just an industry observation in general that, it's not that sustainability was not an issue before the pandemic, but I think, first of all, brands, in terms of repositioning, brands became more human, right? They were hurting too. They were talking to their customers who were hurting also. So it was a much more compassionate voice. And I think that was helpful to a lot of brands, especially brands that maybe don't have a human voice most of the time, whether that's banking or, kind of the very serious industries. And I think it humanized everyone. I think as well, consumers, were adjusting how they feel about life, really, and consumption, and how they worked, and going to the office every day, and so I think consumers demanded even more change. And just for me personally, we were ordering so much on Amazon, like the boxes and the waste, we were just, and the takeout containers from the deliveries, and we were just faced with all of this garbage that we were creating. And I think consumers demanded more in terms of packaging and new ways to do business. And certainly in my industry, from my client city Winery to across the boards, when I think of New York, actually, which was the worst hit initially in the pandemic, everybody changed. You had to change your business model. You had to turn on a dime, and obviously doing deliveries, but picking up orders outside of the thing. Retail did that as well. So, there are too many brands to give kudos to one, to be honest. It really was a change. And I just hope, and I think a lot of brands have maintained that positioning a little bit. We'll see if it continues, but I think it was, from that standpoint only, it was positive. It was so much suffering for so many families, and we have to not lose sight of that. But like many difficult things in life and in the world, we learned from it. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Brands
And New York, I think everybody knows how serious New York took a hit.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very challenging time for lots of places around the world. And New York, certainly, I think, was definitely one of those unfortunate hotspots. And you're right. Some businesses didn't survive. Some businesses had to completely reorchestrate how they position themselves, how they actually made money. It was a complete change in business approach. So thank you very much indeed for sharing that. And it's been a fascinating discussion to talk about everything from legacy brands to, the sustainability that we've touched on today, and also some insight into the music background of some of your large clients, and that their sort of creative visions and partnership approaches and how it works. But I don't want to wrap up without giving you an opportunity maybe to share with us anything that we haven't mentioned today, Val, or is there any other topic that you'd like to maybe share with us that you think may be of value to our audience?
I mean, global peace.
I suppose at the time of recording this,
I know, exactly. Yeah.
Global backdrop is one of conflict in Europe again, which is very sad. But global peace, I think, is great. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the standard beauty contest question that, answer that people are asked, but, that's top of mind for me today. And, but I think also just, and it's what we've been talking about, but I think as both consumers and business people, we do need to hold clients and companies that we use feet to the flame a little bit in maintaining authenticity, right? And in, they've set out these missions, and it's not okay to just come out and say we're doing this and we're doing that. Like we have, keep alert, see what they're doing, demand more transparency, which was also a fabulous result of I think the pandemic, and just the power that consumers have now that they did not have 15 or 20 years ago, certainly. So use that power. I'll just finish with that.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly. Yeah. Cancel culture can get a little bit OTT sometimes. So be responsible and compassionate. Yeah.
Well, look, I think there's some excellent points to end on, and thank you very much indeed for adding those. It's been an absolute pleasure to spend some time with you today, Val.
Likewise. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Well, look, that's the end of today's show with Valerie Brown. Please make sure to tune in again to see and or listen to the next VistaTalks show, where we'll be discussing more interesting topics with interesting people from all around the world. Thank you very much indeed, Val.
Thank you.